This week on The Record, Senate President Dave Schatz joins us to recap Missouri Governor Mike Parson's special session, how the tax cuts will impact your wallet. Plus, Illinois' former Treasurer Alexi Janulius joins us in his bid for Secretary of State, why he's campaigning against bans on books, and how he would change the future of that office. Plus, political science professor Anita Mannion joins us with analysis for The Record. It's all coming up in our third episode of this new weekly political program, The Record. Welcome to Five on Your Side Studios. I'm your host, Mark Maxwell. Thank you for joining us. And joining us now on The Record is Missouri's Senate President Dave Schatz.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it.
Just this morning, we saw Missouri's Governor Mike Parson sign that bill into law that would cut taxes, cut income taxes for residents in Missouri. We're going to take a look at some of those numbers for you in a moment. It would reduce the top income tax bracket from 5.2% down to 4.95%. You see them on your screen. Those bottom three categories are contingent on the state actually bringing in enough revenue to pay for all of that, but you can sort of factor in what this would mean for you. I'll put it in your words. What will this tax cut mean for voters at home?
Obviously, since in 2014 we passed Senate Bill 509 that began the process of bringing down personal income tax. In the time that I've been in the legislature, the last 12 years, we've reduced personal income tax, if this is fully implemented, by 25%. So you can kind of gauge it from that particular perspective. And so this is a continuation of those 509 tax cuts. We accelerated them through this proposal that the governor brought us into special session to do, to get to the point where we get to 4.95. We still have a trigger that will remain that ultimately will get us to the 4.8, and then we put additional triggers in that would take it down to 4.5. If that is fully implemented, we will have tied for the seventh lowest personal income tax in states that do collect personal income tax.
Would you agree that inflation hits people in poverty the hardest?
Absolutely. I mean, but middle class, lower income class individuals obviously being hit the hardest with inflation. And so, again, this was something I think that is responsible. We've done it in a responsible fashion, but it's the right thing to do is to make sure that we're keeping more dollars in Missourians' pockets.
Would you agree that people in poverty and the middle class have less disposable income,
Absolutely.
less breathing room in their budgets today than they had at the start of the pandemic?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, obviously, we've seen with inflation, we've seen a rising cost of fuel. And my concern is what we're going to see when the heating bills start coming during the winter, and how that's going to impact these individuals even more difficult and harder it's going to be at that time. But they do. It's obviously going to hit them the hardest.
Our viewers at home may know that Missouri technically has a progressive income tax structure, or a graduated income tax structure. There are several brackets. Why then does this tax cut treat Missouri's tax code like it's a flat income tax cut, just for the top tax bracket?
Well, I do think that we eliminated the lowest income tax bracket from there, that we took that also into consideration and eliminated that lowest income tax bracket in this proposal in 2023. That will be eliminated as well.
But what stopped the Senate, if it wanted to, from creating different tax brackets, or from taking people who made $30,000 a year or $15 an hour and wiping their tax cut, their tax debt much lower?
Well, I think that is a much broader conversation that would be done during a regular session. During a regular session, instead of in a special session. Obviously, we were brought in a special session to deal specifically with this measure that the governor proposed. And I do think that tax policy, those kinds of conversations about tax policy, should occur. And again, the next legislative session will have an opportunity to continue that discussion. And we made sure that when we took these steps, that we didn't bind a future legislature from addressing those types of issues by going too far, or cutting too deep, or not putting guardrails to make sure that we protected, that we don't put ourselves in a position like maybe Kansas did a few years ago, where they had to end up going back to their taxpayers and raising taxes because they cut too far. I think we've done a very good measured approach to get us in a position that we can have those conversations about those tax brackets, and even the corporate income tax, as to whether or not we would eliminate that in the future as well.
I want to look at that policy in just a minute. You have to be careful when you're setting tax policy, because the big bulk of the tax revenue comes from the big middle, those people that make somewhere between $50,000, $60,000 a year, and on either side of that. So you have to be careful when you're setting those policies. But you've already heard likely some of the criticism from Democrats and left-leaning policy groups like the Missouri Budget Project, who looked at how much people are actually going to see in their take-home check. Some of this is just basic math. Starting out next year, these tax cuts will put more money in your take-home pay. If you make $15 an hour, it's going to be something like $2 to $3 every 2 weeks in your check. If you make 50 grand a year, it's going to be something like $6 or $7 in your check. But if you make $500,000 a year, you're going to see several $1,000s extra in your take-home pay because, yeah, you make a lot more.
And you pay a lot. You ultimately pay a lot more in taxes as well.
Good deal or bad deal?
No, it's a good deal. Again, I think it's the right direction for Missouri. Obviously, we've seen, we've seen Missouri's, population growth stagnate. We've not been able to attract and draw people into the state of Missouri. There are 9 states out that currently exist that have no personal income tax. Personal income tax. Again, we will be very competitive. We will be any of the surrounding states, with the exception of Tennessee. We will have the lowest personal income taxes in there. We'll be 7th when it's fully implemented. And I think that getting folks, how do we attract people to Missouri? I think that's one step in the right direction to draw more of those people to locate in Missouri so that we can fill the much needed jobs that we have out there today.
You mentioned those 9 states that don't have a state income tax. What do they have? Much higher sales taxes?
They do.
Taxes.
They obviously have, they're going to fund government in some shape, form, or fashion, but you do see that. Florida, Texas, some of those places are seeing droves of people move to those areas because of that. They have that zero income tax that's there. Again, I think you're going to have to find a way to fund government, but again, we're heading in the right direction. And again, one thing we are doing, we prioritize our spending. We've done a great job. In the last 12 years I've been in the Missouri legislature, we've balanced our budget. We don't have a credit card. We don't spend more than we take in. And so we've done a very good job. We have a AAA bond rating, and I think we've been responsible. And I think we're always heading in the right direction, putting more of people's tax dollars back in their pocket.
At what point does slashing the income tax revenue, depriving the state coffers from that money that was already reliably coming in, at what point does that trigger higher local properties taxes, local sales taxes?
I don't think we're not approaching that. We've seen the Senate Bill 509 tax cuts that worked very effectively, and that was based upon a fact of an increase of $125 million in general revenue. That as it came in, then we would cut taxes. We cut it by like 0.1, which is about $110 million. We've increased those thresholds, so the next threshold will be $175 million. That will have to increase in general revenue over a 3-year look-back period. And then to go beyond from 4.8 to 4.5, we'll have to go, adjusted for inflation, over $200 million annually. So we're going to be seeing more income coming into this, or more tax dollars coming into the state, as opposed to what we're actually going to be cutting and putting back in the taxpayers' pockets.
This is an election year. I know you don't have an election on your mind, but many of your colleagues do. They're trying to win re-election or maybe promote themselves to some higher office. So help me evaluate the politics of all this. Governor Parson made a trade-off. He canceled that initial plan that you passed through the Senate, which was that one-time stimulus.
Sure.
A lot of people would have seen $500 or $1,000 up front, or some
number
close to that if it was fully funded.
Much smaller amount.
Well, the money's there. There's a $5 billion surplus in the budget. If you wanted to fully fund it,
it's not quite $5 billion.
Well, a billion here, a billion there.
It's starting to talk real money. Yeah, we're talking real money.
But to the people who are making that middle-class income, that are out there trying to just make ends meet, will they think it's a good deal to lose that one-time stimulus payment but get that extra $6 or $7 every 2 weeks?
I think conversations that obviously we had amongst ourselves in this process with the appropriations folks, the vice chair appropriations, I thought that it would be a good deal to do a one-time influx of that stimulus money back to those individuals.
You thought that was a better deal?
I thought it was. I thought we could have accomplished both of those things. But again, this is a process that ultimately you have to get the support from both chambers in order to get this done. But that measure was put out there as a potential that we could continually to do that, and then continue to lower that threshold and get us down to that 4.9 or 5.0. But again, what was chosen, the consensus idea was to do what was done, and we got agreement in the House and the Senate, and the governor has signed it.
Interesting. I appreciate the fiscal policy discussion. Before we let you go, I want to ask about social policy for a quick moment.
Sure.
You saw perhaps the turnout in Kansas, the state next door. A lot of voters came out in that primary because abortion was on the ballot specifically. There was a question there, and there was a lot of independent and Democratic voter turnout, almost twice as high as they expected it. Do you anticipate that backlash in Missouri? And do you think in not allowing exceptions for rape or abortion that Missouri went too far?
Well, again, from a personal level, obviously, I have my perspective. I believe that life begins at conception. I was there when we negotiated the current heartbeat bill that we have in the state. And obviously, the trigger mechanism was put in that eliminated abortion in the event that Roe v. Wade was overturned. States will have an opportunity. I think what the Supreme Court is give states the opportunity to weigh in on this particular issue. Obviously, we have weighed in. Again, I do believe that obviously we're in the right position. From my perspective, I think we are. But obviously, the general public may have a different idea about that, and I think that's something we may see in this next election cycle.
Roe versus Wade, and reasonable people could argue the Supreme Court should not have set this policy. Congress or the legislature should have, but Roe versus Wade did allow states to regulate abortion and even create exceptions for rape or incest. Do you think a reasonable position could be argued at the legislature that women who have been the victims of rape or who are carrying the offspring of an act of incest could have reasonable access to an abortion procedure in the earlier phases of that pregnancy?
I think that, again, from my perspective, I don't think that one mistake, two mistakes don't make anything right at any given point in time. But I do think it's a policy discussion that's going to occur in the future. It may be something that ultimately ends up on the ballot at some point in time. I don't see any time in the near future the legislature taking action to make any changes to what we currently have in place.
Some of our politically minded viewers may know that you had some interest in this Senate race coming up in Missouri. There is an open Senate seat to replace Roy Blunt, Attorney General Eric Schmitt, and Trudy Bush Valentine. Give us your prediction. How close will it be?
I think former senator, a colleague of mine, will win handily in this race. I think it'll be, I don't know the exact percentage, but I think it'll be very handily. He'll win.
Senate President Dave Schatz, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Appreciate it.